Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a cinematic exploration of one of the absolute biggest struggles of the human condition. We're talking about the fierce battle between reason and, well, passive zombification. By pulling together ancient philosophy, some really striking graphic narratives, and visceral real-world accounts, we're going to uncover what it actually takes to stay awake in a world that constantly wants us to just go to sleep. We'll be unpacking what we call the DNA of liberty and contrasting it with the forces trying to turn vibrant societies into mindless collectives. Let's get into it. Our guiding theme today is simple, but honestly, it's pretty chilling. It comes from the famous Francisco Goya etching, "The sleep of reason produces monsters." It's a stark reminder that when we surrender our rational thought, when we let our reason go to sleep, we don't just find peace and quiet. No, we actively invite monsters into our societies. As we go through this explainer, you'll see exactly how abandoning critical thinking and our own individual will literally paves the road to tyranny. So what does this all mean for the systems governing us? Well, the brilliant political analyst Carlos J. Rangel, that's pronounced Rangel, by the way, he argued that a functioning democracy doesn't actually demand permanent moral consensus. It doesn't need ideological uniformity. Instead, democracy is essentially a state of creative chaos. Think of it as an uncomfortable, noisy, imperfect whirlpool of ideas, fierce debate, mistakes, and continuous learning. It's messy, but that exact messiness is the price of liberty. It's the only environment where true progress can happen. Authoritarianism, on the flip side, it offers sterile, absolute order and control. And sure, that might feel incredibly safe in the moment, but ultimately it strips away our humanity. All right, let's move right into part one, the DNA of liberty. To really understand this, we can't just stick to high-level political theory. We need to look at visceral, human reality. It's one thing to talk about freedom in a classroom, right? But it's an entirely another to see it in people who have been denied it their whole lives. Take the powerful story of Yuri Kong, a North Korean defector. Growing up in a totally isolated regime, Yuri was secretly exposed to smuggled foreign media, just simple dramas and movies that contradicted everything she'd been taught. And she powerfully notes that once you learn something, you literally cannot unlearn it. Just seeing people on a screen speaking freely and laughing planted this seed of doubt. And that seed blossomed into the unstoppable courage she needed to choose a completely different future. That kind of incredible resilience demonstrates something huge. The urge to develop our full potential is hardwired into us. It's an ineradicable part of our human DNA. You know, there's a common myth that populations living under generational isolation, like in North Korea or Cuba, won't adapt to freedom. But the constant exodus of defectors fleeing those exact regimes is empirical proof of the exact opposite. Give people even a tiny glimpse of an open society, and that drive for liberty just ignites. It proves that the desire for freedom isn't some cultural construct we invented. It's firmly encoded in our biology. Moving on to part two. Here we'll look at the myths of tyranny and the concept of periodic renewal. If we look back at ancient societies, we see this stark contrast in how power is managed, and it perfectly captures this eternal struggle. In mythology, you've got Olympus, ruled by Zeus. That represents absolute, sterile, tyrannical power, maintaining control through fear and brute force. But opposite that, you have the human experiment of Athens. Athens attempted a rationality-based system of periodic institutional renewal. The Athenians basically realized a profound truth. To avoid the massive bloodshed caused by tyrants clinging to power, they needed a system to just throw the bums out on a regular basis. It was a chaotic, very human attempt at rotating power to protect their liberty from the sterile tyranny of the gods. And that messy human rotation, it perfectly parallels the ultimate rebellion against absolute power, which we see in the myth of Prometheus, famously captured in classic art by Rubens and Snyders. Zeus wanted humans to stay feeble, serving only to prop up the gods. But Prometheus gifted humanity with initiative, imagination, craft, and most importantly, the fire of reason. By bringing fire from the sacred hearth down to mankind, Prometheus gave us our own internal source of power, totally breaking the absolute monopoly of the tyrant. He was brutally tortured for it, but his sacrifice symbolizes that eternal fight, reason against absolute control. Let's dive into part 3, the mathematical shield, exploring vignette 11 of our source material. The source material we're analyzing actually weaves these ancient myths into a modern graphic journal, and there's a fascinating layer of rational architecture hidden right there on the pages. For instance, take the number 28. In the story, this specific sum comes from the 25 total pages of the protagonist's introspective journal, plus exactly 3 specific vocalizations she makes. It's a highly structured, hidden numerical foundation. It's our first big clue that, beneath the chaotic surface of the story, there's a profound, rational order at work. The author uses math here as a brilliant metaphor for balance and salvation. Get this. The page counts of the journal entries perfectly follow the first 7 decimals of pi. That's 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9, and 2. 3 pages on the first day, 1 later that day, 4 on the next, and so on. In this context, pi represents calculated uncertainty with an unbreakable internal order. It acts like a secret code. It's the subconscious anchor of reason for a protagonist who is fighting against a world that's slipping entirely into madness. And it goes even deeper. The days recorded in the journal follow the famous Fibonacci sequence. Day 1, later on day 1, then day 2, 3, 5, 8, and 13. This mathematical, rational shield is the individual's ultimate defense against mindless, populist zombification. In the narrative, the masses are losing their memory and their reason. They blindly follow a leader with these mindless grunts that mobilize their appetites, but leave them totally without a pulse or any real sentiment. So the Fibonacci sequence and pi become the protagonist's active life raft of logic, keeping her afloat in a terrifying sea of social zombies.
This brings us to part 4, the Cinderella corollary, looking at vignette 13.
So what actually happens when we voluntarily drop that mathematical shield? You might ask, what's wrong with wanting a savior? What's so bad about hoping someone will just whisk us away to a new paradise so we don't have to do the hard work ourselves? Well, according to the texts, the Cinderella story is actually one of the most toxic tales we've had imprinted on us since childhood. It's wrapped up in this beautiful, sugar-coated wrapper, but it quietly implants a terribly dangerous idea that has historically set human progress way back. Honestly, the idea of waiting for a magical pumpkin to come along and solve real-world politics, it's as absurd as it is destructive. The sources draw this striking, objective parallel between the Cinderella myth of a magical redeemer and real-world political ideologies, specifically outlining the Marxist myth of some unattainable future well-being. Both rely on the exact same 3 stages. You have a past paradise, current suffering, and a future utopia delivered by a hero. But passively waiting for this happily ever after brutally disempowers your own individual will. It distracts citizens from the here and now and causes them to fully surrender their rational thought. Giving up our agency to a savior basically transforms active citizens into passive entities. The graphic novel metaphorically and pretty vividly describes this zombification as becoming brainless ambulatory meat. Yikes, right? Finally, let's wrap up with part 5, the epilogue, focusing on the political pendulum. So, how do we actually maintain a wide-awake liberal democracy and prevent that zombification from happening? Tracing back to the French Revolution, the source outlines the foundational goals of our main political factions. The left champions rights to opportunity in all its forms, while the right champions property rights and what that implies. Now, a true, healthy liberal democracy doesn't want the total, permanent victory of one over the other. Not at all. It requires the permanent creative churn and balance between these opposing forces. For democracy to thrive and keep authoritarian control at bay, we absolutely need this constant political alternance between opportunity and property. It's very much like the ancient concept of yin and yang. As captured perfectly by artists like Marc Lafia, this concept emphasizes an enduring struggle. The promises of liberal democracy are invariably broken the second populism takes root, and that leads straight to authoritarianism, regardless of whether that regime calls itself left or right. As the source points out, in fanciful fiction, things work out perfectly. But in reality often clashes hard with wishful thinking. The political pendulum requires constant daily vigilance because the absolute moment we stop participating, the moment we let the creative chaos of democracy fade into a sterile order, that's when our reason goes to sleep. Which brings us right back to where we started. The urge for liberty is hardwired into our very DNA. But maintaining it, that requires active, rational effort every single day. We've got to rely on our inner shield of reason, reject the toxic lure of magical saviors, and fully embrace the noisy, creative chaos of true democracy. So we'll leave you with this final, crucial thought to ponder. If the sleep of reason produces monsters, are you awake enough to protect your freedom?